We've all been there. We've all witnessed a movie that left us scratching our heads in disbelief. The peculiar thing is, someone at some time for some unexplainable reason thought that making the film was a worthwhile idea. What were they thinking? One such movie was the 1958 black and white horror classic, The Hideous Sun Demon. I'm Old Man Kelly and I can't help myself. I need to know the story, the who's, the whens, and the whys. Now, before I get started, I want to explain that the information in this video mainly comes from books and interviews done by the wonderful film historian and writer Tom Weaver. Anyone interested in B-film history should check out Tom's work, and I hope he doesn't mind that I'm using them as a resource. There were other sources I used in this video, but his books were the main ones. Thanks, Tom, for all the fantastic work you've done over the years. And now, on to the Hideous Sun Demon. The man who is mainly responsible is Robert Clarke. Bob lived from 1920 to 2005. He grew up in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and was always interested in being an actor, but unfortunately he suffered from stage fright. He attended Kemper Military School in college with the idea of making the military his career, but that didn't work out due to his asthma. He ended up at the University of Oklahoma, where he acted in radio plays, and then the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he began appearing on the stage. However, he never graduated. Instead, he took off for California to see if he could make it as an actor. And by 1944, he was a Hollywood actor. Well, sort of. He was in films, but usually his parts were uncredited. From 1944 to 1950, he managed to consistently work, but it wasn't until 1950 that his career started to somewhat take off. He landed a part in the Ida Lupino film Outrage, and from there Edgar G. Ulmer's independently made black and white science fiction horror film The Man from Planet X, in which he was the star. For the next few years, he appeared sometimes as the star in a B film or a small part in a larger studio film. Also in the 1950s, Clarke began doing a lot of work on TV, something he would do for most of his acting career. Now, the year before he began working on this film, he married Alice King. Alice was one of the King sisters. The sisters were an American big band era vocal group consisting of 6 sisters: Alice, Donna, Louise, Marilyn, Maxine, and Yvonne. Robert and Alice would remain married until her death in 1996. In 1957, he was in 2 science fiction films, The Incredible Petrified World and The Astonishing She-Monster. It was She-Monster that convinced Robert he could do a film of his own. The Astonishing She-Monster was made by a man named Ronnie Ashcroft. Clarke said if Ronnie could make that amount of money off a quick, cheap film like The Astonishing She-Monster, it sort of stood to reason that a science fiction film with a bit more quality and substance to it ought to make as much money or more. So we came up with an idea based on The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Actually, he had never read the story, but he had seen the 1931 Frederick March film. Of course, the Sun Demon, in my opinion, has more to do with the Lon Chaney Wolfman movie than Dr. Jekyll. A writer who was a friend named Phil Hinder helped him write the original screenplay. The first draft was called Saurus, which is Latin for reptile, as in Dinosaurus. He also had a friend who taught a screenwriting class at the University of Southern California, so we took the class. It was there he met 3 film students: Tom Bartros, Robert Kirkman, and Vilas Lampinix. They would become partners in the making of the film. Kirkman would help finance the project, getting the title of associate producer, while Bartros would become the editor and co-director. And Lampinix was one of 3 cinematographers. 3 because they shot only on the weekends and sometimes people just weren't available. The final screenplay was written by another USC student, E.S. Sealing, with Dawn Hogue polishing up the dialogue. Robert Clarke, who was supporting his wife and her 2 children from a previous marriage, had $5,000 to invest. He knew that Roger Corman had produced a film called Stakeout on Dope Street for less than $20,000, so his $5,000 was a good start. Clarke once told an interviewer, When Alice and I were first married, I took our last $5,000 and started making this movie. Does that sound like Ed Wood? Luckily for him, Robert Kirkman had just inherited a large amount of money and originally pitched in $5,000, and then he would give him $1,000 whenever he needed more money to keep the production going. He would pay his cameraman $25 a day and some of the lesser crewmen $15 a day, plus all the free hamburgers they could eat. What a deal! The original plan was to make the film in 5 or 6 weekends, but it also took closer to 14. And they only worked on the weekends for a very good reason. You see, if you rent the equipment, camera lights and such on a Saturday, because the rental shops were closed on Sundays, you didn't have to return the equipment until Monday. That meant you could have 2 days usage for 1 day's rental fee. Also, because this was a non-union production made mostly by film students, working on the weekends would avoid any problems with the unions. The final cost of the picture was around $50,000. Robert had to borrow a few $1,000s from his brother and sister to help pay the lab bill. That came to about $8,500. He said he was able to pay it off over a couple years, but I found this notice of legal action in the paper, so there must have been a bit of a problem. Robert's own home was used not only for the sets, but also the production offices. The monster suit was created by a fellow named Dick Casarino. He would also play a policeman in the film. In an interview he did in Ultra Film Fact 62 from August 1997 with Paul Parla, Casarino said, "The reason why I play the cop was to keep an eye on Bob and catch him before he fell. If you think the inside of a car is hot after being in the sun, try walking on top of a gas storage tank. Bob and I were supposed to have this knockdown drag-out fight on top of the dome, but Bob was almost incoherent as he knocked me down and ran off. It was like falling onto a hot iron." When asked if the costume lived up to everybody's expectations, Kirkland said, "Yes, it was a fantastic thing. Bob insisted on wearing it, and it's a wonder he didn't lose 50 pounds running around in that thing and climbing up to the top of a gas tank. As I say, he was determined. He was going to do it." Clarke was the only one to wear the suit. "All the stunts, all of the running, jumping, and fighting I did myself. No other actor played the Sun Demon. And the thing is, the suit was built on top of a rubber skin diving suit, which meant that Clarke was always sweating like crazy while wearing the costume in the hot California sun. He says in some of the scenes where it seemed like he wet his pants, it was due to the sweat. Of course, they shot mostly without permits and used fake police cars and such, and it was always a concern that they would be pulled over by the real police, but they were lucky and got away with it. One time they were shooting in an old railroad yard in a dusty, dirty, abandoned storage facility. Bob climbed up a ladder that led to a loft to see what was up there, and all of a sudden this tramp rises up like Dracula coming out of a coffin, he laughed. I was so shocked, startled, we had no idea that he was up there. So they used the tramp in the movie. I don't know whether we paid him, we must have given him something. Anyway, he sat up. In the scene where one of the cops climbs the ladder to the lift, this tramp sat up and scared the cop the way he had actually scared me. He was one of the best actors in the picture, he laughed. As far as the actors, except for Bob Clarke, who was the star, as well as the co-director and co-writer, the film was acted by mostly inexperienced actors. Ann Russell, Robert's lab assistant in the film, is played by Patricia Manning. This was Manning's first film, and she would go on to do a bit more, especially in TV. She had a short career, with an episode of the Alfred Hitchcock Hour in 1954 being her last credit. I would like to tell you more about her, but I can find nothing. The sexy blonde Trudy is played by Nan Peterson. Nan was born Nancy Lou Peterson in 1931 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and as far as I know is still alive today. Like Manning, this was her first film, and she would go on to have a short career, mostly on TV. Her last credit, an episode of The Twilight Zone in 1964.
Me?
Clarke called her a real nice girl and said, Nan Peterson was a good sport. We wanted her to look as sexy as possible, and she didn't have any trouble with that. She had all the right equipment. I pushed her into the water in the scene on the beach and she didn't complain. That water was very cold. She didn't put up any fuss. We didn't have to get somebody else to take the fall. We selected Nan Peterson because of her voluptuous figure. Peterson said, "I don't think they paid me very much for Sun Demon, but I did get something, I'm sure. Even if they didn't pay me, I was happy to have the part," she laughed. Tom Bartros said, "I thought both Nan and Patricia were very nice and very professional. They were not prima donnas. They knew it was low budget and they knew it was a chance for them. We were all in the same boat. Bob was the only one with experience." As for the other actors, many were not real actors, like Peter Similak, who plays the gangster.
You were going to take him to a hospital, huh?
He was actually a real estate broker. In fact, many of the crew played parts in the film, like the script girl Dini Fallis, who was a nurse in the hospital and also played in the bar. The soundman Doug Menville played a policeman. And Robert Kirkman, the associate producer, also played a cop. He's the one who gets hit by a car. He said, "We did 5 takes on that scene and it still looks fake. I just didn't want to get that close to a car. It was not my ambition to be a stuntman." Now, the mother and daughter in the film were played by Donna King as the mother, and the daughter was played by her real-life daughter, Zandra. Donna King was the sister of Robert's wife and was also one of the King sisters.
Mommy, can I have a glass of milk?
Well, of course, darling, I'll get a glass.
The son of Robert Clarke, Cam Clarke, has a YouTube channel, and Cam interviewed his cousin, Zandra Cockline. She said, "I remember when I was eating cookies and pouring milk. We did that take several times, but he endearingly chose the one where I spilled the milk on the floor."
We interrupt this broadcast for an urgent police bulletin. The latest news.
Not all the actors were appreciated.
You've told me that Dr. McKenna was exposed to highly radioactive material for 5 or 6 minutes.
Dr. Stern is played by Robert Gary, and Boutros described his acting as horrible. Kirkman said, "All the dialogue between Dr. Stern, Anne, and Dr. Buckwell, it drives me up the wall every time I see it. I feel like, oh, come on, get on with it." The older woman on the roof is played by Clark's mother-in-law, Pearl Driggs, the mother of the King sisters. Driggs, by the way, was the real last name of the King sisters, but the Driggs sisters just wouldn't sound right, would it?
Young man, I hate to bother you again, but...
And the newsboy was Clark's nephew, David Sloan. The man who created the monster suit, Dick Casarino, also worked very hard helping with the film. During the scene where Clark was on the cliff, thinking about ending his life, he looks down to see a couple of kids playing with an adult. The adult is Dick, who went down there to help get the kids going and ended up wrestling them for a very effective scene. The song Nan Peterson sings in the bar and quote-unquote plays the piano was written, played by, and sung by Marilyn King, the youngest of the King sisters. Oh wait, Nan really wasn't playing the piano herself? I wouldn't have known.
Never ending is love strange desire.
In the 1982 film It Came from Hollywood, a documentary that compiles clips from various B-movies, they used that piano bar scene in the film, and Marilyn King earned a few $100s for its use. Good for you, Marilyn. Nan Peterson said, "I could sing. In fact, in 1957 or 58, I sang at the Palladium when I was the queen of the Fireman's Ball, so I don't know why they wouldn't let me do my own singing in Sun Demon unless Marilyn wanted to sing it herself." She also wrote it. According to the book Keep Watching the Skies, American Science Fiction Movies of the 50s by Bill Warren, the original script was a lot more ambitious than the released movie. Apparently, a lot of the transition scenes were never filmed, and that's why the movie seems so uneven. After 12 to 14 solid weekends of working on the film and then the editing, the film was done. Nan Peterson said, "We had a lot of fun later with the premiere. We premiered it at a drive-in in Amarillo, Texas, where his brother worked at a radio station. That's probably why we had the premiere there. At one point, we went to the top of the concession stand and we were being interviewed. Then Bob snuck off while I was speaking, changed costume, and came back as the monster, which was fun. The film was distributed by Pacific International on a double bill with a film called A Date with Death, a film made in Psychorama, which also starred Robert Clarke. Robert Clarke would often go to the screenings of the film wearing the Sun Demon costume. But sadly, after 18 months, Pacific International went bankrupt and Clarke never saw any of the profits. He ended up selling the TV rights and eventually all the rights. He said, "I took such a terrible bath with the bankruptcy on both Sun Demon and The Time Barrier," which was his follow-up film, "that I just felt there was no way to make another one and come out with anything." So what is the Hideous Sun Demon? Well, as soon as the film begins, a radiation accident has just occurred and a man is being rushed to the hospital. Why waste time showing us the accident? After all, it might have been exciting. I've often wondered if that was a budgetary thing. Anyway, after the credits, the man arrives at the hospital. His name is Dr. Gilbert McKenna, and he has just received a horrible dose of radiation. Apparently, the lab that he works in uses a toy train to put radioactive isotopes away.
All radioactive material is kept in a lead vault. And when we want a particular isotope, we have a little electric train, a toy train like you give your kids for Christmas, which we back into the vault.
Hey, I hope real labs have a safer system, but I wouldn't know. Anyway, his exposure should have caused terrible damage, yet he seems fine.
Time for cocktails?
Oh, I asked you a serious question. I'd like a serious answer.
All right. Feel very well, thank you.
We learn all this from a discussion between Dr. Stern, Dr. Frederick Buckwell, and Dr. Gilbert's assistant, Ann Russell. We also learn that Dr. Gilbert McKenna, who they call Gil, is an alcoholic, a fact that really doesn't amount to too much of anything as the film goes on.
And I warn him for the last time. Whiskey and soda mix, not whiskey and science.
We'd better discuss this some other time.
He's taken outside to the roof of the hospital to get some sun. This is where he first turns into the Sun Demon. We never see his transition, but again, I would guess that was due to budgetary reasons. Back to Stern, Buckwell, and Russell. In a scene that goes on for way too long, we learn that Gil, when in the sun, regresses to a reptile. Apparently our ancestors were lizards. Hey, best not to make sense of it and move along. Cut abruptly to Gil driving home and then having dinner. The fact that he can transform into a demon I guess doesn't worry him, as he felt no need to stay at the hospital. Anyway, from there he goes outside and drives his car to a gas station wearing sunglasses at night, and from there to a bar where he first sets eyes on the beautiful piano-playing Trudy Osborne. They don't talk and soon he is on the road again. Dr. Frederick Buckwell thinks he found someone who can help.
Yes, and if anybody can help Gil, it's Dr. Jacob Hoffman.
Do you think he can?
He's the best man in the country on radiation poisoning.
At the same time, Gil is doing his own research, but as you can imagine, he's having some emotional problems dealing with the situation.
Darwin never even scratched the surface. How could he?
He ends up on the edge of a cliff, thinking that he just might end it all. It's only after seeing some kids playing around that he changes his mind. So he heads back to the bar where Trudy is still playing the piano and singing the same song.
Strange pursuit, the pursuit of love.
This time they talk and seem to hit it off. The problem is Trudy has a gangster boyfriend. But Gil beats him up and he and Trudy are off to the beach where Trudy falls into the water. She takes off most of her clothes, but don't worry fellas, this is the 1950s, there's nothing to see here. They fall asleep, but unfortunately when Gil wakes, the sun has risen, so he has to run before it happens, leaving Trudy behind. At home, Anne tries to comfort Gil, who is having an emotional breakdown.
Don't you realize what this means? He may be able to cure you.
It's no use, Anne.
Gil.
I'm beyond hell-bent.
He goes back to the bar where he runs into Trudy, and she's not happy. Neither are her gangster friends. They take Gil outside and beat him up. But Trudy has a change of heart, feeling sorry for him. She takes him home to let his injuries heal.
Where am I?
My place.
It's your place.
Don't worry, they're not here. We're alone. Here, drink some of this.
When the gangster shows up, well, the Sun Demon has his first kill. He scares a group of kids, but they're all right. And he winds up back at home. Or Ann's home, I'm not really sure. But Clarke gets to chew a little scenery doing his best Kirk Douglas.
Why should I be the one picked up for this? Please tell me why!
The police eventually show up, so Gil's back on the run, hurting or killing a policeman in the process. He meets a child whose advice to him is to get some more sun.
Oh no, the sun is good for you. One time I had a cold, and Mommy made me sit in the sun all day, and it made me well. And you should eat a lot too. That's what Mommy says. Aren't you hungry?
But when the child's mother hears of the lunatic on the radio, she goes into a panic. You would too if it was your child hanging out with the Sun Demon. And this all leads to the thrilling chase, and finally... As thrilling as this film is, as you might imagine, it has a few flaws. But first, let's agree to accept the premise of the film, that a heavy dose of radiation can have the effect of the sun turning a man into a crazy lizard person. I can deal with that, but Clarke makes the mistake that is often made by filmmakers, and that is offering too much explanation. The more you try to explain the cause, the more ridiculous the premise sounds. What I think would have been better is to skip most of these scenes and explore his relationship with the two women. I mean, there are hints that Ann Russell has feelings for Gil, and that might have led to an interesting problem with Trudy. In the film, Ann and Trudy never meet. Also, his alcoholism needs to go somewhere. Oh sure, he winds up at a nightclub getting drunk, but you would too if you had his problems. Why make such a strong effort to point it out at the beginning if it doesn't become a major plot element later? It's a Chekhov's gun situation. Maybe it's his need for a bottle that causes him to leave the hospital, and that would make his fascination with Trudy even more believable, being with someone who encourages his behavior. So he's torn between Ann, the smart one who is working to get him a cure, and Trudy, the one who loves to have a good time. And one of these two women need to be in real danger at some point, or even be killed, to add some real tension. I've got a better ending. He transforms into the demon while with the little girl, Susie. Her mother runs to save her. Ann shows up and somehow has a gun. Maybe she could have taken it from the policeman who was hit by the car, tying that whole thing together. She loves Gil, but to save the child, she pulls out the gun. The mother is screaming, "Shoot him!" Trudy tries to stop Ann, and the two begin to fight. Ann pushes Trudy away just as the child seems to be lost, and then the gun fires. It ends with Ann crying over the body, Trudy slowly, sadly walking away, and Susie being hugged by her mother, who is in tears. But this was the 1950s. You couldn't have a female hero, could you? Now, back to the actual film. The way it's shot is sort of odd. There are moments when it has the look of a film noir, like the jazz score playing as Gil gets beaten up. That's typical noir. But there are other scenes that are flat, gray, and boring like a 1950s Roger Corman film. I'm guessing this has something to do with using 3 different cinematographers, and the film seems choppy at times, like certain transitions were never filmed, and I think that might be the case. And of course, there's some real bad acting, but that's okay with me.
We know that each individual goes through this evolutionary process before he is born. And it's not inconceivable that this process could be reversed.
As far as the music, I believe it was all library stock music. I'm pretty sure I've heard some of this music in other films before, but I can't remember which ones. And now it's time for Something Good or Why Should I Watch This Movie? First of all, I agree with Joe Dante on Trailers from Hell when he said that this is the finest Sun Demon movie ever. But I think this is another one of those films that is just a fun watch. I think the fact that it was made on a micro budget gives it a certain charm. And more than other similar films of the time, it explores the main character's emotions in dealing with his condition.
Gil!
I'm beyond hellbent. This thing I've got is different. For days I've been reading everything I could find. My case is different. It's not in any of the books. I can't be cured!
But you can't stay locked up here for the rest of your life.
What else can I do?
And now and again there's some very clever camera work, and I thought the Lizard Man costume was terrific. The main three actors, Bob Clarke, Patricia Manning, and Nan Peterson, all do a great job. Both women are attractive, and both have good screams. And yes, there are some slow moments, but there are also some good action scenes. And even though it uses stock music, it uses it effectively. Like last episode, if you like cheesy 50s horror, I think you'll like this film. I get the feeling that Joe Dante didn't like it when he said, if the trailer is better than the feature, it's only because the trailer is shorter. One thing I really like is that the makers of the film were not embarrassed or apologetic. In fact, they were proud of what they accomplished. Tom Bartros said, I'm proud of the work I did on Sun Demon considering the time and the money we had and the people we had. They were all loyal, but none of us were geniuses. We just had so much to work with, and I think we made a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Robert Kirkman wrote in the introduction to the book Scripts from the Crypt, The Hideous Sun Demon by Tom Weaver, I look back at those years. 1955 when my parents died and I got part of my inheritance. 1960s when my trust became available to me, and 1970 when it was all gone. All that foolishness, living on the high hog. I regret all of it with one exception. I would never trade my involvement with and my investment in Hideous Sun Demon for anything. Nothing in my life compares to that. I wouldn't change it for the world. And Robert Clarke said, I was the guy who started out not knowing what the hell he was doing, and ended up almost the same way, he laughed. But boy, what an experience. And for all of this to accumulate into a movie that is obviously one of the cult classics of its category is just fulfilling, so gratifying.